Welcome to a new series that digs into the incredible beers and stories of the Trappist breweries. These are beers made within the walls of a Trappist monastery by or under the supervision of monks, and purely for the upkeep of the monk's way of life or good causes. Despite that, or maybe because of that, they have had a huge impact on how and what we drink today. Some of the best beers in the world come from Trappist breweries, but not a huge amount is known about them due to the limited access lay people have to them and a little bit of that classic Belgian brewing mysticism. We hope one day to visit as many as will let us in, but for now, we're going to be taking you through them one by one to give you the history, the impact, and of course the flavours that they have given the world, all from our own place of worship, the Brewdio.
So today we're covering what I thought was my least favourite Belgian Trappist brewery.
You thought was?
Yeah, well, so doing the research, getting the story, and also digging into the beers and their history has kind of made me reevaluate Chimay. And the story, and indeed the 6 beers we're about to taste, are so epic that we're having to break this up into 2 episodes. The first time we've done that for the Trappist series.
Johnny, I'm loving this concept of a double episode because you know what? There's 6 beers on the table and one of them is massive. It's a double, maybe.
It is a double.
Double.
Yeah, but keep your powder dry because we're going to do the history first. And we're only going to taste 2 beers in this episode, sort of the core range of Chimay. But we're going to crack one right away because otherwise it's about 100 years before we actually get to taste a beer. And the first one we're going to crack is Chimay Red, which is a double to start the double bill. So how far back do you think we're going for Chimay?
Way back in time.
way back. Nice and precise.
16th century I'm going for.
Oh, no. We're in the middle of the 19th, I'm afraid. So we're in sort of, not the extreme south of Belgium, because Belgium sort of slopes away to the southeast, but we're right on the French border.
Right.
In what's known as the Boot of Hainault, which is a really quite hilly, start of the Ardennes area, very marshy.
Marshy
as
and
well.
hilly.
Marshy and hilly. The best of all worlds if you're trying to walk anywhere. But what it did have, despite being quite an inhospitable kind of place, it had a big iron industry. Right, and this is what most people were employed in the mid-19th or early 19th century. It was huge for that area and pretty much the only thing going on. But tragically, up in Liège, not a million miles away, about 100 miles away, they discovered coal. Now, this meant that everybody making iron went, well, I'm going to go where the fuel's at.
Off to coal.
Yeah,
okay.
So they all went off that way because they could fuel their fires, quite literally. So this left this particular part of Belgium pretty desolate, with not a lot going on. And there was a local priest, Jean-Baptiste Jourdain. Couldn't have sounded more French if he tried.
Great name.
And he was a local parish priest, and he realised that this was going to be a huge issue, that they were already falling into huge levels of poverty, of desperation. And he looked around and he was like, right, what can we do to get employment up, to feed people? How do you do both those things? It's agriculture, right?
Yeah.
So he starts to look around for the kind of people that might help an agricultural industry kick off. And bonkersly, bizarrely, back then, you'd actually probably look to the monasteries. And in particular, one particular sect of Catholicism, which is
the Trappists.
The Trappists, exactly. So he approached a couple of Trappist monasteries, the bigger ones in Belgium at the time that were already founded, to ask if they wanted to open up sort of a sister or a daughter or a son.
Franchise,
yeah, in this area. He firstly went to Westmalle. They said no. They had other fish to fry, other monasteries that they were working on. He then went to Westvleteren, another of the bigger monasteries at the time, which was actually bursting at the seams. They had too many monks and they really needed to move. But they also said no, which is a little bit of a strange decision as far as I'm concerned. However, Jean had found some land that he was going to do it on. The local prince who lived in Chimay, in the Chimay castle, had said he'd donate the land for this monastery. So he and a couple of monks from the Westvleteren went, well, we're just going to do it anyway, sort of unsanctioned. We'll get permission. What is it? It's better to ask for forgiveness than permission.
Yeah.
Sounds like a Christian approach.
Yeah.
So they said, well, we'll found one ourselves and we'll just get this moving. So yeah, they founded a monastery in 1850 in a sort of pretty marshy area just outside of Chimay, and that is the foundation of Scourmont Abbey as it's known, but as we know it, Chimay.
Chimay. So you got these renegade monks. I might call them Jedi Knights.
Okay, sure.
And they've got some land given. What happens next?
It's a bit of a poisoned gift from the prince, right? So this land, as I said, it's marshy, it's hilly around there. The area that they're given, very, very marshy, very, very stony. And it takes all of the brothers about 2 months to clear enough land of the stone to actually start farming. And then the soil is such poor quality that they estimate it's going to take about 20 years to get, profit from the land from growing what they hoped to grow, which was barley.
Right.
So actually, it's quite a tragic tale. They end up begging for money to try and get this monastery going, like desperate poverty for these monks that's supposed to be saving others from poverty.
Yes.
But what they do manage to do, because this land, is grassy and marshy, they start a small dairy. So they get cows in, and they start selling cheeses and milks and stuff like that to try and raise some money. And then the other thing that you probably could do if the land isn't that fertile is a brewery.
Yes.
So 25th of July 1850, the monastery is founded. 1862, just 12 years later, they decide, you know what, maybe the future lies in brewing. Which is one of the few things I have in common with monks.
I mean, to be honest, it sounds like a hard path, and it would probably drive you to alcohol, right?
Now, there's a little bit of a gap in the book and the research that I've been doing on this as to how they kind of found a brewery, as to who's funding this. Maybe the prince steps up again. But they actually installed 2 steam engines. Bit of a rarity in brewing back then.
Wow.
Particularly in Belgium. But they found this brewery and they do their first brew 1862, 1863, steam-powered brewery. And what they actually brew is a doppelbock.
Oh.
So a Germanic-style like lager.
Yeah, I wouldn't think from Trappists.
No, exactly. Or so the people that brew the first batch are lay people that install the brewery.
Right.
So they're sort of commissioning it.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it was a German firm or something that, they were like, well, this is what we know and this is the yeast and the ingredients that we have. So we'll brew a Doppelbock. So yeah, the first beer brewed by Chimay was actually an 8%, well, probably wouldn't have been 8% back then, 5-6% dark lager.
Lager.
Heartily approved.
Lager lads.
Some kind of
yeah, that's pretty dark.
ancestry to this beer in terms of maybe the malts used, but definitely not in terms of the flavours. So amazingly, the beer that followed that, I guess the Germans went home and they were like, that's not really what Belgium wants or is famous for. Though it was, of course, famous as a monk beer in Munich. They switched to what they call beer forte, so strong beer, loud beer, if you're a musician. And this was a big, dark, strong ale. And they bottled it in 750s, which is also quite uncommon back then, I think. And actually, this beer, it took a year to make, and it got a really, really good reputation and started to spread throughout Belgium and through France as a really good, really strong beer that you could actually keep for up to 20 years. There's records of people saying this beer will be good. Sorry, not 20, 10, I think. 10 years.
Wow.
10 years. 20 years, I'm not sure anybody's sitting on a beer for that long.
You died when you're about 20 back in the day.
yeah. So get it for your ancestors.
Yeah.
So they thought this beer was going to be good for 10 years, and it had an incredible reputation. In fact, there's records of it being referred to as like a health tonic, a health drink. Beer de santé.
Ooh.
The beer of health.
Oh, I like it.
Which I guess probably would have been promoted by the monks who wanted to make their beer seem a little bit more holy.
Yeah.
But so it had this incredible reputation, but it's not all going to go to plan. Did you know that the first ever fridge was built for beer, not food? Or that surgeons learned that they should be washing their hands from somebody investigating sour beer? How about the fact that the Nazi Party was formed over pints in a Munich beer hall, and that brewer's yeast might just be the solution to climate change? Intrigued? Well, then my new book might just be of interest. I'm super excited to say that my 4th book, The Meaning of Beer, is available for pre-order in hardback, ebook and audiobook at the links in the description box below, all for delivery on the 7th of November. This book has taken me more than 2 years of research, travelling and writing, and it's essentially a revisionist history of humanity, claiming that beer is our greatest invention, right up there with the discovery of fire and the creation of language. So as I say, the links are below. This beautiful book is out on the 7th of November in hardback, ebook and audiobook, and I would absolutely love to hear from you if you've pre-ordered it or if you want me to come to your town and do a talk, have a few beers when this book is released. Love and beer.
So having like steam engines and being steampunk monks, making big double box and, like you're saying, magical beers that are
last
famed,
a decade. Yeah.
that last a decade. How'd it go wrong?
Well, so yeah, I mean, they reached the point actually where they're almost producing two kinds of beer. They've got their normal beer and then they've got pitch-lined barrels, so where the oak wouldn't have any effect. And they're able to sell more for that. So they've got almost an opposite of barrel aging beer that they're selling for more, such as the reputation of this beer. But First World War comes along, absolutely devastates the brewing industry throughout Europe. There's rationing, there's all kinds of things going on. And just as they think that things are going to start improving again, Second World War comes along. And actually Hitler builds a bunker not far away from the monastery. So the monastery becomes garrisoned with Nazi troops. And they strip all the copper, and they essentially have to start entirely again. If that hadn't have happened, maybe we wouldn't have what we have here, because it's a complete reset for the brewery and a chance to reinvest and kind of start again with the actual brew house itself. So although it was founded in 1850, what we have is essentially a brewery and an approach to the brewing that starts just after the Second World War. And it's only a couple of years after that that this beautiful beer is brewed for the first time. So end of World War II, the monastery is basically in ruins. The Nazis have used the actual church itself as a stable. The living quarters are in disrepair, and obviously the brewery has been stripped. So the monastery, the monks, when they move back into the monastery, they elect a monk who's going to essentially revamp the brewery element of this, and this is a man, Brother Theodore. And he's actually sent off to Leuven, to university, to learn how to brew. He's got no experience at all to start with, but he goes off and studies brewing under a very famous professor of brewing. He takes a really, really keen interest in the brewery and in this project. I guess it's not often that you have, the budget and the majesty of a monastery brewery to work on. So Professor Leclerc kind of takes Brother Theodore. Oh my God. Wing. Under his wing, exactly. And he actually says later that Brother Theodore was one of the best pupils he ever had. And together they rebuild this brewery as a concept and as a physical entity. And one of the first things that they do is they come up with a brand new beer. And this is released in 1948.
Yes.
And it is Chimay Red, this beer that we know so well. So this was actually released at Easter. It's an Easter beer. I don't really know what the history of Easter beer. I talk about it in A Year in Beer. It's a pretty nebulous concept, essentially. It was brewed to be drunk at that time of year, maybe to be to speak of the flavours of spring, or maybe to last until September, depending on the brewery. So we're not really sure what style it is. But all we know is that monks particularly used to brew beers specially for religious occasions, such as Easter. And it's quite fitting that it was Easter. It was their rebirth. And obviously it was Jesus coming out of the cave and going, actually, I'm all right. So should we look at this absolutely iconic beer? So it's a double, which you could tell, I guess, from the colour and the strength of it, which is about 7%. So it's banana, it's clove, it's brioche. It's a little bit, and I mean this in a nice way, meaty, umami-esque.
Oh,
a little bit. Just a little bit naughty, a little bit,
spicy,
savoury, and spicy as well. So it's worth noting that this beer also, and the blue, which we'll talk about in a bit, has curacao, dried orange peel in as well, which might explain a little bit of kind of citrus, but also a little bit kind of really caramelised kind of fruitiness to it. So yeah, all of that is on the aroma, but it's just underpinned with a kind of savoury, roasted meat kind of character, I think. But on the palate, it's really sweet, caramelised, banoffee-esque. It's quite a quick finish, no real bitterness. Just a little bit of kind of roasted malt just keeps it feeling a little bit snappy and quick on the finish. And it's probably drier than we think it is. It's a super quick ferment. 28 degrees they ferment at, and it's done in 4 days. So this is this is a lightning quick ferment.
Speedy monks.
Yeah. I said at the start of this video, like, Chimay are not my favourite brewery. I think this is a lovely beer, but I don't think it holds a candle to, say, like, Westmalle Double. But it is significantly more for want of a better word, crushable.
Yeah.
It's a very easy drinking beer.
Yeah, it does disappear after you've drunk it.
Yeah.
7%.
And I think, they've done a lot to try and make that the case. Chimay have always, and we'll also dig into this later on, have always tried to be a little bit more commercial than the other Trappist breweries. And I think that's reflected a little bit in where these beers have ended up. Because although this is a 1948 recipe, there have been huge changes, whether it's just, biologically in the yeast or whether it's the ingredients that have gone in. The processes have been a couple of new breweries since then. Everything's been about making it a really approachable Trappist beer. So this house yeast, that kind of slight meatiness, all of that kind of clove and banana and pear, and indeed the curacao, that orange peel, is going to be in pretty much all of these beers. And it's very apparent in Chimay Blue, which is another really dark, big, strong beer that was actually released for Christmas the same year. So another religious festival kind of beer. What are we? We're at 9.
Ooh,
We're at 9% now. And this one takes a full 5 days to brew. So an extra day gets you that extra 2%.
So is it the yeast that's making this so quick to brew?
Yeah, I mean, so this yeast was selected by brother Theodore at Leuven. So I don't know whether it's sort of in a Leuven yeast bank or something
right.
originally. Home brewers, you can get hold of this yeast, although it's sort of claimed that it's the original because it's been stored rather than brewed with, which would have changed at Chimay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a big character of these beers, and this one, to add difference, is way darker than the first one, 2% stronger, and I think on the nose, meatier. More yeast.
Is that what it is? More yeast.
And I think more kind of stone fruit, fig and date, whereas this one was actually all about quite fruity character from the yeast, I think, and from the malts. This one, it's a bit more savoury and it's a bit more malt-led. It's a bit more raisins, figs.
Dare I say it, Johnny?
Yeah.
It's a bit more Christmas.
It is a little bit more Christmas, maybe a little bit spicy as well, a little bit phenolic.
I'd have some of this with a baked ham.
Oh yeah, you
Smell-wise.
would. Oh, you could glaze it in this, reduce this down, glaze it. Could be beautiful. It's a big, unctuous winter beer, essentially.
Yeah. Wow. Merry Christmas.
Really opens up with loads of like nail polish and pear. Much sweeter
Way sweet.
than you think it's going to be
Yeah.
from the aroma. And way more fruity as well. It's a really interesting beer. It's kind of got a dichotomy, a schizophrenia to it, in that it smells very different to how it opens up on your palate. And I know that's a real snobby sort of thing to say, where people are, oh, it's different on the palate, but it smells and tastes different after you've drank
Big time. Big time.
But again, so drinkable. Mm-hmm. Like, I love Westmalle Triple with all of my heart, but it's not. This I could drink like it's 5 or 6%, and I get in a lot of trouble. It's not a big, bold, complex. Sorry, it is big and bold. It's not a complex beer.
Getting a little bit of heat, bit of alcohol heat on the way down.
Yeah.
But like you say, it's a 9% beer. I want some baked ham.
You want some? It's all Brad can think about at this point. Something worth noting about this beer is that the brewery itself and lots of beer experts consider this big, beautiful beer one that you would age.
Right.
So drinking it fresh is, it's delicious. This bottle is very fresh, but generally sort of 2 to 3 years is seen as to when this beer kind of peaks. Yeah, because you'll get more and more character out of that re-fermentation in the bottle. Little hints of oxidation will sort of round it out, add sherry kind of character as well. In a nod to its history at Chimay, there's a 750 version which is called Grand Reserve. It's an identical beer up to the point when it goes in bottle, and then because it's a bigger vessel, there's less oxygen.
Right.
It slowly becomes a different beer.
Interesting.
And that's why they've named it differently as well, because they believe it's.
So it's literally the same beer, but it's a different volume, bigger bottle, so less oxygen. You can age it for longer.
Yeah.
And they count that as a different beer.
Yeah. Which I think is bold.
It is
I think if we did a blind taste test of them, you might not be able to tell if they were the same age. But equally, I love the fact that they do that and they claim that, because I think that people underestimate how much beers change. And, all the beers that we have in the fridge over here, they're probably not getting better necessarily, and we should be aware that aging is has a big flavour impact on our beer.
So it's not 100%. It's not like these are all kind of beers where they've got Brett in there or something that's taking over when other things fade off. It's not anything like that, is it? It's just that house yeast and the oxidation process that happens over time.
Yeah, I mean, the same as, happens in fine wines. There's probably shouldn't be any Brett in those really nicely aged reds. That's what's happening here. It's just, yeast living its life in this little microbiome. So obviously there's 6 beers on this table and we've only tasted 2. Now, given the amount of history, the discussions, the interesting beers and history, we couldn't fit it all into one episode. So you're going to have to tune in next week, or indeed, if you're watching on Dave, just click at the end of this video and we will have a tasting of 4 really unique beers, including like the beer that the monks drink, a triple version that came out about 20 years after these 2, a beer that came out for their 150th anniversary in 2020, and then this Calvados Barrel Aged Blue. Why not? We'll see you next week. Pray for us in the morning.